We're Karen and Bo Christensen, a Danish-American couple who met in Germany in 2016. Bo is an airline pilot, and Karen is a freelance advertising creative director. In late 2022, we bought Château de La Tuilerie in Martell, France, and are working to make it a bed and breakfast and wedding destination fit for a queen. Welcome to Queen's Escape. So today, Bo and I are dressed up, not in our old worn-out working clothes, and we actually smell decent because we are going to be tourists in our own town. We are going to the Gouffre de Padirac today, which is an underground cave that they found in this area. And we'll go and learn about it and then share a little bit of that information with you. But exciting day to actually stop and enjoy this place where we live. The Gouffre de Padirac, or Devil's Chasm, or Bottomless Pit, is one of France's greatest natural curiosities. In 1889, Alfred Martell, the father of modern speleology, ventured into a terrifying chasm and sailed along a hidden river in an underground palace. Since 2001, the Gouffre de Padirac has been a protected natural monument, and it is France's most visited cave. The Gouffre de Padirac is located in the northern part of the Causes de Gramat. The causes are a series of limestone plateaus that start at the southernmost point of the Massif Central. As soon as the rain hits the arid surface of the causes, it seeps underground, sometimes traveling several miles through cracks, galleries, chambers, and sumps. When CO2 dissolves in water, it becomes carbonic acid, which is corrosive for limestone. This acidified water seeps into the rock, dissolving it and widening the cracks. This is called karstification. Under the ground, the seepage water creates streams, which join together to form rivers. The dissolved limestone transported by the rivers gives them their turquoise color. One legend from the 19th century says that at the end of the 100 Years' War, before being run out of the Quercy, the English hid a great treasure wrapped in calfskin at the bottom of the Gouffre. Another legend is the legend of Saint Martin. According to this legend, the Gouffre de Padirac was kicked open by the devil, who issued a challenge to Saint Martin as he followed behind on the donkey. He said, "You wretched saint, you'll never manage to jump over this abyss. But if you can, you will save these souls from hell." With a miraculous leap, the donkey reached the other side, leaving the imprint of its hoofs in the rock. The souls were saved, and the devil disappeared to the bottom of the cave. The copy on a postcard of the Gouffre de Padirac from the 1930s tells the legend of Saint Martin, and it says, "Saint Martin mounted his mule, signed himself with the cross, and with a miraculous leap reached the other side, and the mule's hoofprints are still visible in the rock." Alfred Martell is the father of modern speleology, which is exploring caves. Martell was attracted to the Gouffre by his friend Voulier's description, which was, "It's a big round hole that opens up in the middle of a field without any sign that it's coming. One only sees it when one is right at the edge, and one's immediate reaction is to back away." So on the first day that Alfred Martell explored the cave, it was July 9th, 1889, and he arrived accompanied by 3 other explorers, Gouffre, Armand, and Fouquier, plus a team of 6 to help them maneuver. So Martell, he took a rope ladder down to the bottom of the Gouffre orifice. Measuring the shaft, they began exploring the galleries that extended in opposite directions. After, exploring some dead ends, they returned to their starting point and headed over to one last gallery, which led to an 11-meter shaft. So using another rope ladder, they arrived at what he described as a delightful little cave, which continued steeply down to another shaft. They had run out of ladders by this time, but luckily were able to climb down. So when they got down to the bottom in the evening at a depth of about 102 meters, they came to the water that they hadn't been able to follow in the first gallery that they explored. And following this stream, they reached a vast passage. It was 10 to 40 meters high and 5 to 10 meters wide, with a stream flowing through it. So they walked along the 370-meter-long gallery for the first time, and then the stream began to swell and suddenly filled up the entire gallery between two perpendicular walls. So it had become a river and several meters deep, so they couldn't actually go forward anymore for that day. So on the second day, Martell and another explorer, they had 4 candles attached to a boat that they brought down into the chasm, and they went along what was an underground river, and they discovered the Grand Pendeloque. They described it as scenery which no artist could have imagined, and we had never set eyes on anything so strangely beautiful before. They came up against 33 barriers, and each time they were forced to step into the water and carry their 25K boat past the obstacle before climbing in again and continuing. After 6.5 hours of, having to get out of the boat and carry the canoe and then get back in the boat, they were absolutely exhausted and rejoined their companions. So a couple years later, when Martell was back at the cave in 1895, he set off on an exploratory mission with a boat and 2 crewmates. On the way back, as they left the Pas du Crocodile, that is where today you get back in the boat to return back to the entrance of the cave, the overloaded boat hit a wall and capsized, plunging the 3 men into the water and into total obscurity. One of the quotes from one of the men, "The sudden descent into a catacomb-like darkness was what first struck me. More than the total immersion in 12-degree water, the feeling of cold faded into insignificance when compared with the truly terrifying sensation of utter blackness. And since that moment, I have understood the instinctive repulsion that many caves inspire in some people." One of the explorers that were with Mr. Martell that day, Mr. Delclau, who was the last to fall into the water, had been able to form a mental image of the situation as the candles went out, and had seen a platform of stalagmites on the surface of the water just behind the boat. In 2 or 3 strokes he reached it, he pulled himself up and was able to provide help to the other 2. But it took some time to save Martell, who had set off in another direction, and he feared that he wouldn't survive. Finally, guided by voices and still in pitch darkness, he was able to climb up alongside his companions. Luckily, he had candles with him and 2 metal boxes wrapped in wax cloth that contained a few matches. The first box was wet, but the second contained the dry matches that saved their life. So on a subsequent visit, and watched by more than 1,000 curious onlookers standing around the Gouffre de Padirac, they lowered 3 boats and continued. They were underground for 23 hours, during which time they climbed a passage that they hadn't explored the previous year. This led them to the Grand Dome, yet another natural wonder. So they came upon 2 lakes that were raised above the lake below in a vast dome covered with twinkling stalactites. Over the following years, Martell, he returned to Padirac around 15 times. He had explored hundreds of caves, but Padirac was the only one that he resolved to open to the public. In 1899, the transformation work that prepared the Gouffre de Padirac to be open to the public reduced the time that it took to reach the end of the cave from 12 hours to 2.5. The main course of the explored part of the river was 2,300 meters long. The work of the Gouffre lasted 8 months and included the building of a 16-meter artificial shaft leading to a gallery that opened out onto the Gouffre, and a grand escalier, a huge 40-meter iron staircase. Noisy, bright boats disturbing the splendor of the eerie catacombs sailed along the river, lit by carbide lamps. In the 1930s, with the advent of paid leave, there was an increasing demand for leisure activities, and effective poster campaigns for the Padirac on the rail network were organized. The entrance pavilion, which is still there today, was built in 1930. In the Gouffre itself, 2 lifts were built, meaning that visitors could avoid climbing down and up the 56 meters of stairs. In the Grand Dome, a path was built around the Lac Superior, and a series of staircases were attached to the wall, rising more than 50 meters above the river and offering a stunning panoramic view. So Padirac is the only French cave open to the public where the entire range of underground configurations, everything that you see in that cave, was perfectly sculpted by nature. The Gouffre de Padirac opens up from the Cause de Gramat in almost perfect circle, 30 meters in diameter. The chasm plunges down more than 75 meters, and strangely, it doesn't appear to narrow with perspective because it widens down at the bottom.
The Gouffre de Padirac is less than 20 minutes from our chateau. Amazing.
For the next 40 meters descent, visitors can choose between a lift or they can go down the staircase, which mimics the original descent via a beautiful Eiffel-style staircase dating from 1898. Martell, he climbed down that chasm on a rope ladder in 1889. People have described it as a gigantic gun barrel or the bottom of a telescope. A final staircase or a lift takes visitors to the Galerie de la Source, 102 meters under the Earth's surface. This is where they leave daylight behind and venture into the underground world. It's known as the Sixth Continent that still holds so many mysteries. Here the temperature remains at a constant 13 degrees, which is the average annual temperature above ground. So this river at the bottom of the Gouffre is what formed the gallery or long riverway. It took tens or even hundreds of thousands of years. Horizontal strata divide the rock face into layers of a thickness of 20 to 50 centimeters. A rocky layer with an average thickness of 20 centimeters was deposited over a period of 20,000 years. So that's 20,000 years for every step down to the bottom of the Gouffre. It's a time frame that's really hard to grasp, but by climbing 103 meters down into the Gouffre, we have just walked through several million years in the life of the planet Earth. The section has now been adapted for tourists, with a footpath taking visitors to the Gouffre's finest underground chambers. The Grand Colonne, or column, a vast 75-meter tall calcite flow, partly blocks the gallery. At Padirac, there are areas which are not open to tourists. 11 species of bats have been recorded in that area, and there is a tiny gastropod, which is known as Bithynia padiraki. And this species is endemic to the river at Padirac, meaning it doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. In 1901, when black smoke marks from the lamp started to appear on the walls, electricity was introduced in the Gouffre. One problem with traditional bulbs is that they generate heat, which together with light stimulates the growth of cave moss and becomes deeply embedded in the rocks. Since the development of low-energy light bulbs which generate little heat, the moss has virtually stopped spreading. The most recent development is the use of LED lamps, which are not harmful for the environment and are much more powerful than traditional carbide lamps. After the passage along the water's edge, visitors climb 300 steps up to the lofty heights of the Grand Dome, the magnificent underground cathedral. The stalagmites that resemble piled-up plates are one of the memorable images of the Gouffre de Padirac. So the carbon dioxide effect on stone. This is the phenomenon in which water deposits some of the limestone that's dissolved in it. There's two parts of this. The first part is that when water evaporates, it leaves behind a residue of limestone. And then the second part of this actually has to do more with the pressure where the water is traveling through. This is the process that occurs when a drop of water travels through a crack and arrives on the ceiling of a cave, where the pressure is lower than it was in the crack. These limestone deposits result in the formation of stalactites. That's the long rock formation that point down in an opening. The drop of water then falls to the ground, where it explodes, reducing the pressure even further and leading to the formation of stalagmites, which are the stone that rises up from the ground. So in high pressure, as in the small cracks where the water is seeping down from the surface, it has a high CO2 level, and this dissolves the rock and it picks up limestone as it goes. But then when you get to an opening, so let's say it opens up into a cavern below, then the CO2 level in the water lowers, and that's when the water lets go of the limestone inside that's dissolved inside it, and it creates rock because it releases the limestone. So when the water reaches the ground from such a height, the drop explodes violently, which explains the formation of stalagmites that resemble piled up plates, as they can be seen in Lac Superior in the Padirac. On the walls, seepage hardens into crystalline cascades, which hang vertically if the gallery slopes downward. This is how the Grand Pondeloque was formed. On the cave floor, if the water level is shallow, limestone deposits build up on any rough ground that breaks the water surface. And this buildup of deposited limestone, this prevents the water from gradually building up around these small pools of water. So effectively, it kind of creates these dams. The climb to the top is well worth the effort for the spectacular panoramic view from the top. This is the real highlight of the visit. One day, luckily not for thousands of years, this ceiling will collapse, creating a second orifice open to the outside world. In the areas closed to the public, explorers and scientists are still making new discoveries. Since the 1950s, speleologists have explored dozens more kilometers of galleries, making Padirac one of France's most extensive underground networks. The Gouffre de Padirac is a gigantic network of more than 40 kilometers of galleries, which grows with each new expedition. Some explorations are now post-sump. In other words, to reach the next section of the network, explorers need to dive to cross areas that are underwater, increasing the level of difficulty. In 1947, dye tracing showed that the river re-emerged in the Dordogne Valley as several springs through sunken vertical shafts. In 1996, from the Fontaine de Finou Springs, Bernard Gauche completed the first crossing between the two. Alone carrying 40 kilometers of equipment, he cleared 22 sumps and 5 kilometers of galleries, 3 kilometers of which were underwater. It is an incredible achievement. The total distance from the Fontaine to the Gouffre is 20 kilometers. Where does the Padirac end? That's what Martell wondered in 1889, and the same question is still being asked today.
A trip to Gouffre de Padirac is definitely recommended. It's absolutely fantastic.
The Gouffre de Padirac is open every day from Easter to the end of the country's November school holidays. It takes approximately 1.5 hours to do the entire tour. In the peak season, we highly recommend buying your tickets from the website in advance to avoid queuing and, if possible, to get there early in the morning. Wear warm clothes and suitable shoes for a damp environment. We recommend a coat or jacket with a hood because there is a lot of falling water.